Welcome back to Outlaw Operations, where every tale drags you deeper into the shadows you never knew existed. Tonight's descent is a twisted journey laced with deception, obsession, and betrayal. What began as a dream built on love and ambition spiraled into a nightmare of shattered trust and heartbreak. But before we open the case file, a heartfelt shout-out to our incredible community, each one of you who tunes in, shares, and supports this channel. You're the heartbeat of Outlaw Operations. Now here's the real twist, nearly 88% of you watching haven't hit that subscribe button yet. If you're one of them, don't just be a visitor, join the crew, claim your seat in the dark, and become part of something bigger. Get comfortable, because what you're about to hear isn't just a story, it's a reckoning. Morgan Geyser wasn't the kind of girl you'd expect to be the center of something so dark. She was quiet, often kept to herself, and lived in a world that most people around her didn't understand, or even notice. Her teacher, Ms. Langford, had started to pick up on a few things early in the semester. Morgan had a fascination with horror stories. Not just the ordinary kind, like ghost tales or Halloween specials, she gravitated toward the macabre, the twisted, the sinister corners of the internet where stories didn't always have an ending. Ms. Langford gently suggested she stop watching them. Try something lighter, she advised, hoping Morgan would trade her obsession with shadows for something more harmless. Morgan didn't respond. She just stared past the teacher, eyes glazed as if her mind was somewhere else entirely. The hammer was discovered a week later. It wasn't part of a class project or left over from home repairs. It had fallen from Morgan's locker, the loud metallic clank echoing down the hallway as she was called to the principal's office. Students turned to look, whispering, confused. The sight of that tool, so out of place in a school hallway, sent a chill through the air. Inside the principal's office, she sat stiffly. When asked why she had it, her voice was low, almost detached. "It's for self-defense," she said. Principal Hastings leaned forward, watching the way her fingers twitched slightly, her lips pressing together. She'd been observed talking to herself in class more and more lately, mumbling things no one could quite make out. At times, her eyes would dart toward corners where no one stood. A call was placed to her mother. The teacher explained her concerns, the horror obsessions, the hammer, the odd behaviors, the whispering. But Morgan's mother brushed it off, chuckling lightly. "She's imaginative. Just going through a phase," she said. There was a tone of exhaustion in her voice, like she'd had this conversation one too many times. Nothing came of it. Morgan's classmates had noticed the diary long before the teachers did. It was black and bound tight, and she never let it out of her sight. If someone tried to peek, she'd snatch it away. But rumors spread. Some said she wrote about death. Others claimed she'd drawn faceless figures lurking behind trees. No one wanted to sit near her anymore. Ms. Langford reached out to Morgan's mother again. She shared what students were saying, how afraid they were, how Morgan seemed to be slipping deeper into something else. Again, the mother sighed. "She's fine. Just a bit dramatic." But Morgan wasn't fine. She wasn't alone in this descent. Her friend Anissa Wire was with her, a girl who shared the same obsession, the same hunger for something terrifyingly unreal. The two were inseparable. They spoke of Slender Man as if he were real, as if he were watching them, waiting for them to prove themselves. What started as fantasy turned into something else entirely. Peyton was their friend. A sweet girl, trusting. On that day, the three of them had gone into the woods under the guise of play. The sun filtered through the trees, the air thick with summer heat. No one heard the screams. Peyton didn't know what was happening at first. Maybe none of them did, not even Morgan, until she pulled the knife. Anissa stood frozen, eyes wide, watching Morgan stab their friend. It didn't look like a game anymore. She later said she thought it was all pretend, something like in the stories they read. But the blood soaking the ground said otherwise. "I didn't want to hurt anyone," Anissa said in court, her voice shaking. But she was there. She helped plan it. They believed they had to. If they didn't, Slender Man would come for them. That belief, that fear, ruled their thoughts. It led them to that forest. The trial that followed chilled the courtroom. No one wanted to believe that two 12-year-old girls could do something so cold. But there they were, sitting silently, their faces pale, their eyes dark. Morgan had been diagnosed with early-onset schizophrenia. She heard voices. Saw things. Her father had the same illness. It ran in her blood. She pleaded guilty, but not in the way most do. A plea agreement declared her not guilty by reason of mental illness. The judge's gavel fell heavy with the sound of finality. 40 years in a psychiatric hospital. That would be her sentence. Anissa, too, was found not guilty by reason of mental illness. She would serve 25 years in treatment, unable to tell what was real and what was fantasy. Time passed. In 2021, Anissa stood before the court once more, older now, eyes no longer haunted, at least not as visibly. Doctors spoke of her progress. She was no longer a threat, they said. She could go home. On September 13, she walked out of the psychiatric hospital as a 19-year-old woman. She returned to her parents' home. Her internet was monitored. She wore a GPS device. She was forbidden from contacting Peyton, drinking, using drugs, or visiting horror websites. Meanwhile, Peyton, the girl who lived, had graduated. She was studying medicine now, determined to heal others despite what had been done to her. She had no close friends but had started dating someone. No one knew what demons still haunted her nights. She rarely spoke of that day in the woods. But some wounds don't leave scars on the outside. They linger in silence. And then, there was another story. Kay Sawyer. Born in 1993 in Bend, Oregon, Kay was bright, glowing, even. She was cheerful, loved life, and was full of ambition. She lived with her boyfriend, Cameron, in a small apartment near their college. They were the kind of couple people envied, affectionate, seemingly stable. She wanted to be a photographer at first and was good at it. But her job at a dental clinic changed everything. Watching the dentists work, helping patients calm down, realizing she could bring comfort to the nervous, it sparked something in her. She wanted to be a dentist. She had a future. She had a plan. On the night of July 23, 2016, Kay attended a bachelorette party with friends and coworkers. It was fun, light-hearted. But after the older women went home, she stayed out. Went to another bar. Drank more. Danced. Laughed. A man flirted with her. Someone texted Cameron, letting him know. Jealousy brewed. When Kay called him past midnight, slurring slightly, he came to pick her up. They fought in the car. When they arrived home, Cameron stormed inside. She didn't follow. 10 minutes passed. A message lit up his phone. "I'm sorry. Goodbye." He panicked, rushed back to the car. She was gone. The door hung open. She answered his call once, said she was taking a walk, her battery low. Then silence. That night, Cameron searched everywhere. Thought she might be at a friend's. The next morning, she still wasn't home. Her phone was off. Her absence became a presence, loud, terrifying. He called her family. No one had seen her. Kay was missing. And somewhere in that quiet Oregon town, something evil had stirred. Whether it was born of madness like Morgan's, or a rage like Cameron's, or something older, something that's always existed in the dark corners of our world, no one could say. All that remained were echoes. Blood in the leaves. Shadows in the woods. And young lives, once full of promise, swallowed by horror. Cameron stared at the clock. The red digits glowed like warning signs in the dimness of the room. 2:47 a.m. Kay should have been home hours ago. His calls had gone unanswered. At first, he convinced himself she had just lost track of time, maybe stayed over with friends. But now, with silence stretching this long, anxiety was creeping in like a shadow under the door. By morning, he called her parents. Their voices trembled slightly, not quite panic, but something close. No, she hadn't called them either. Still, they tried to soothe him, maybe she had stayed overnight somewhere. Maybe she just needed a break. She'll be back, her mother said, not believing her own words. But Cameron couldn't sit still. He messaged every one of her friends, co-workers, even casual acquaintances. One by one, their responses formed a pattern. No one had heard from her. Not since she left the bachelorette party the night before. It was like she had vanished into thin air. By that evening, something inside Cameron cracked. He went to the police. Desperation colored his voice, and his eyes begged them to understand the urgency. But the officers behind the desk were unhurried. She's an adult. Maybe she just needed space. They told him to give it time. Most people come back. But Kay didn't. She didn't show up the next morning either. She missed her shift at work, something she never did. Her boss called Cameron, worried. Kay had been reliable to a fault, a punctual, committed worker. It wasn't like her to disappear without a word. This time, the police listened. The search began. But eyes slowly turned toward Cameron. People started whispering. His worry had turned into agitation. He'd mentioned another man, someone who had flirted with Kay at the party. Cameron had been jealous, visibly so. He'd even stormed out to look for her. And then, her phone had gone dark. Battery dead. No calls. No pings. Nothing. Cameron had been the last person to see her. It made him the first person to suspect. He didn't run. When they brought him in, he stayed calm. He told them everything, stuck to his story. He let them search his car, his apartment, didn't even ask for a warrant. He even joined the search parties, his eyes scanning the woods, the roads, the gutters, calling out her name like he still believed she might answer. He passed the lie detector test. They had no evidence, no reason to hold him. The whispers didn't stop, but the law had to let him go. Instead, they turned to the man who had flirted with Kay at the party. They tracked him down, a man whose face blurred in party photos, who had no solid memory of that night. He'd been too drunk, too detached. He didn't even remember Kay's name. Couldn't recall her face. Said he hadn't seen her since that night. The trail went cold. Then came a quiet breakthrough. Kay's car was found. It had been parked near the venue of the bachelorette party, exactly where she'd left it. Keys gone, but untouched. She hadn't come back for it. No signs of foul play. But it told investigators one thing: she hadn't gone somewhere willingly. She'd vanished from that night, from that road, from the very air itself. The police expanded their efforts. They combed the route she might have taken, searching for signs of struggle, blood, discarded clothing, anything. But the streets were silent. Surveillance cameras blinked, recording nothing unusual. It was like she'd stepped out of the party and been swallowed whole by the night. Flyers began to go up. Her face, smiling, frozen in time, plastered across telephone poles, bus stops, the internet. Cameron, her family, her friends, they walked the city handing out those images like lifelines. "Have you seen her?" became a constant refrain. Then, an unexpected visitor came to the station. A young woman named Isabel. A rookie cop. Pale, shaking. Eyes full of something heavy and restrained. She asked to speak privately. She told them about her husband. Edwin Lara, a campus security guard. A man who had always been calm, if not distant. But something had changed after Sunday. He'd come home late from his night shift. His hands trembled. He didn't eat. Didn't sleep. Just paced and stared at nothing for hours. And then, finally, he broke. He told Isabel a story. Said he'd hit a girl. That she was drunk, stumbled in front of his work vehicle. He couldn't stop. He panicked. Hid the body. Hid her belongings. Swore it had been an accident. But Isabel saw the fear in his eyes. And something else, something darker. She didn't believe him. Not entirely. Still, she waited. Afraid of what he might do to her if he suspected anything. She stayed quiet, played the role of the loyal wife, all while weighing the cost of silence. By the time she told the police, Edwin was gone. They descended on the property. The barn behind their home reeked of secrets. Inside, they found a woman's handbag, filled with cosmetics, ID cards, receipts. A pair of small, delicate shoes. Hair, blonde strands tangled in dried blood. A stone, large and heavy, crusted red. Kay's things. But no body. Edwin had vanished. And he had taken her with him. Blood suggested this wasn't an accident. The stone was no brake pedal. This had been intentional. Brutal. Cold. Isabel confessed he might have gone to Los Angeles, his parents lived there. Police followed the trail. Halfway there, they found his car, abandoned on a roadside. Inside, a stack of notes, apologies scrawled in a shaky hand. Numbers. Nonsense. None of it led anywhere. But Edwin wasn't done. He had become something else, a ghost with blood on his hands. In a quiet parking lot, a girl named Andrea was finishing her shift. 19. Tired. Just wanted to go home. She slid into the driver's seat, pulled out her phone. That's when he got in. He didn't shout. Didn't flail. Just calmly opened the door, slid into the passenger seat, and pointed a gun at her. Drive, he said. To California. To the end of the road. Andrea's heart beat like thunder trapped in her chest, but she obeyed. They drove through the night, past empty fields and gas stations glowing like embers. Edwin talked. He told her everything. About Kay. About the night. About the stone. He even showed her pictures. Her face. The news articles. Andrea stared in horror at the smiling girl now labeled missing. He told her his car had died. That he needed a ride. That he'd considered kidnapping a pregnant woman, but couldn't find one. Andrea had simply been alone. Wrong place, wrong time. Hours later, he snapped at her for driving too fast. Said she'd attract attention. Made her pull over. Then, he handcuffed her to the seat and took the wheel. Andrea didn't cry. Didn't scream. She just started talking. Anything to keep him human, to keep herself alive. She told him about her family. Her little brother. Her dog. Her dreams. And slowly, she started to feel it, his guard lowering. Just a little. But enough. She began to plan. Andrea knew something was wrong the moment Edwin took control. She tried to explain about her car leaking oil, an inconvenient truth that felt like a lifeline thrown in the storm. She hoped maybe, just maybe, suggesting they find another car would ease the tension, maybe even buy her some freedom. But Edwin wasn't fooled. He was cold, methodical. When they stopped at the gas station and later at a small roadside diner, Andrea's hope dwindled. Edwin's voice was sharp, unforgiving. Don't say a word. If you open your mouth to anyone, I swear I'll kill you. And anyone you speak to. His words weren't empty threats, they were promises soaked in menace. Andrea obeyed. She swallowed her fear, her screams silenced beneath layers of forced calm. She tried to signal in subtle ways, in the way she carried herself, the slight tremor in her hands, the desperate glance that begged for help. But the world passed her by, oblivious. Strangers smiled and went about their business, blind to the silent terror riding shotgun beside them. That night, they pulled into a grimy motel. The kind of place where shadows gather and secrets lurk in every corner. Andrea knew what Edwin's plan was. He was going to violate her there, break her body and spirit. Fear settled over her like a heavy cloak, but so did resolve. She had to get out. Once inside the cramped room, Andrea acted. Quietly, she turned on the alarm on her phone. The shrill ringing shattered the tense silence. Edwin's eyes darted around wildly, panic setting in as he muttered something about the police. His breath quickened, paranoia gnawing at him. "It's just a notification," Andrea lied smoothly, voice steady despite her pounding heart. "I have a disease, a venereal disease." His expression twisted into disgust, and just like that, Edwin recoiled. He backed off, keeping his distance, their bodies separated by the bed. Chains and handcuffs bound Andrea's wrists, but for a moment, she felt a flicker of control. Edwin tried to sleep, but the paranoia consumed him. Every creak, every distant noise fed his fear that the cops were closing in. Andrea lay still, waiting, willing him to drift into unconsciousness. If he slept, maybe she could slip away in the dark. But then, suddenly, Edwin bolted upright. He grabbed a disposable phone and dialed rapidly, speaking fast in Spanish. Andrea caught only broken pieces: urgency, fear, the need to flee. They hit the road again, the night swallowing them whole. It wasn't long before the car's engine protested, oil boiling under the hood. Edwin's anger flared, sharp and dangerous. "We need another car," he growled. Andrea's heart sank. She had imagined he might abandon her, leave her stranded, but the twisted plan in his mind was darker still. On a lonely stretch, they spotted a small model car surrounded by other vehicles. An elderly man was loading groceries into it. Edwin's eyes hardened. This was the car. He dragged Andrea toward it, brandishing his gun, his voice cold as steel. The man called for help, but Edwin fired, a sharp crack in the night air. Blood pooled on the pavement, the old man staggering, but not down for the count. Grabbing Andrea, Edwin ran back to the gas station, the stench of fear thick in the air. Police arrived too late to stop the chaos but soon intercepted Edwin as he jumped into another car, the doors left ajar. Inside, to Andrea's horror, 3 children were trapped. The oldest, just 17, gripped the wheel nervously, his license fresh and shaky. Edwin pointed his gun at them, cold and merciless. He forced the terrified boy to drive. The children belonged to a family from Canada, visiting the U.S., their vacation shattered into a nightmare. When the parents returned, their world crumbled, their children gone, the car missing. Frantic calls to the police set off a high-stakes chase. Edwin ordered the children to throw their phones out the window, desperate to erase every trace. He boasted of his danger, warning death for any resistance. But the teen, brave beyond his years, reasoned with Edwin. Letting them go would only trap him faster, police would follow, the trail too easy to lose. After a tense pause, Edwin relented. The children were dropped off by the side of the road, shaken but alive. The youngest still had his phone and quickly called their parents. Police converged, urgency pulsing in every officer's step. The children told their story, of a man who kidnapped them, confessed to murder, and left them terrified on a roadside. Police followed the trail with relentless speed. Edwin's desperation grew. Regret gnawed at him for stealing the car with the kids inside. In a fit of paranoia, he recorded a chilling video, a twisted apology and a callous declaration that killers like him walked free. He forced Andrea to post it online, the caption dripping with menace, "The killers are free." Paranoia peaked. Edwin insisted helicopters hovered overhead, though Andrea heard nothing but the silence of the night. Then, Flashing lights, a patrol car in hot pursuit. Edwin was arrested, handcuffed and shaken. Andrea, her nightmare far from over, was pulled from the car and cuffed herself. Police eyed her suspiciously, questioning if she was an accomplice. They searched, interrogated, demanded proof of innocence. Hours stretched into an agonizing 18 before she was finally released. Meanwhile, in Bend, Oregon, Cale's disappearance haunted the police. Edwin was their prime suspect. They brought him in for questioning at a California station. His story twisted and tangled under the weight of scrutiny. First, he claimed Cale was hit by a car. Then, under pressure, admitted to striking her with a rock to silence her screams, convinced she was still alive. But police found no evidence of an accident in his car. His story shifted again. He said he intended to pick up a prostitute. A convenient lie, the area had no such activity. Students might stumble home drunk from parties, but campus police ensured their safety. Finally, Edwin confessed. On the night Cale vanished, he was driving near the university when he spotted her, drunk and vulnerable. Pretending to be a security guard, he offered her a ride. She trusted him. But that trust was a trap. He raped her. He strangled her. He killed her with repeated blows to the head from a rock. The darkness inside him had been brewing for years, fueled by twisted admiration of serial killers. Cale was his first victim, a horrifying prelude to more planned horrors. The man sat in the dim, humming interrogation room for what felt like eternity. A clock ticked somewhere, indifferent to the agony building inside those sterile walls. He hadn't said a word for hours, just stared at the floor, brows stitched, hands trembling. When the question came again, "Where is she?" he flinched, as if the air itself slapped him. Eventually, Edwin Lara lifted his head. Eyes bloodshot, soul hollowed out, he raised one finger and slowly pointed to a spot on the police map. The silence after that moment was louder than any scream. Detectives followed the coordinates without speaking. The location was remote, littered with broken tree limbs and a haunting, decaying scent carried by the wind like a warning. It was a place where sound seemed to die. When the officers pushed through the thickets and reached the edge of a shallow creek bed, their breaths caught. What they found didn't resemble a person anymore. A mutilated body lay there, ravaged, stripped of identity by brutality and time. But one thing stood out, a fractured skull, caved in violently, as if whoever did this had wanted more than death. They wanted silence. The autopsy would later confirm the truth, blunt force trauma to the head. A weapon hadn't been found, but the rage behind the strike screamed through the broken bones. DNA later matched. It was Cale. Edwin Lara, the man now trembling in chains, was charged with her murder. But the list didn't stop there. Rape. Kidnapping. Carjacking. The horror widened when the name Andrea surfaced, another victim who had escaped, but only barely. He had once been a security guard. Ironically, a protector. The same man entrusted with a badge, a vest, handcuffs. And it was with those very tools that he'd become something else entirely. When they brought him to Oregon, the weight of his crimes trailed him like a thick fog. The death penalty loomed. But justice is never linear. During the trial, Edwin requested a lawyer. They denied it. The confession he gave, an unfiltered admission of everything he'd done, was tossed aside like it never mattered. But the truth still clawed its way into the courtroom. The prosecution built a web around him, strand by bloody strand. In his shed, they found things. Dark things. Traces of Cale. Her blood. Her belongings. His DNA. The testimony of his own wife, who stood pale and broken in court, whispering details that made jurors visibly recoil. Andrea, the survivor, told them how Edwin spoke of Cale's last moments, how he had taken everything from her before taking her life. The courtroom held its breath when the plea deal came. Edwin would admit to attempted murder and kidnapping, but refused to confess to the rape. Still, in exchange, the prosecution accepted a life sentence. No parole. No chance at daylight again. 2 life sentences, in fact. As if one wasn't enough to reflect what he'd taken. But it didn't end there. Cale's family, still trapped in that endless loop of grief, filed a lawsuit. They claimed the university that hired Edwin never dug deep enough. No psychological evaluations. No real background checks. Yet they handed him authority. They gave him a weapon. A vest. The power to abuse. That case was settled. $2 million. Not nearly enough to cover a life lost, but enough to say, you failed her. After that, the university scrambled to plug the holes. Evaluations. Policies. Background checks. Too late. But that wasn't the only story stained by Edwin's shadow. On a different winter night, cold enough that even the city lights looked brittle, a young woman named Mia vanished into the darkness. It was February 5, 2022. The streets were alive, throbbing with youth and music. Mia Skadich-Stev was just another college student wrapped in dark clothes and white sneakers, chasing warmth in the arms of nightlife. She danced hard that night. Not carelessly, but freely. She drank, but not to forget, just to feel the blur of a weekend. She laughed. Moved between clubs. Somewhere in that crowd, she met a man. Older. Soft-spoken. Waiting in the dark. When the club closed around 6 a.m., Mia didn't have a ride. Her friends peeled off in different directions. Her phone buzzed once, then stopped. She told them she'd take the bus. She waved goodbye and walked toward the edge of the city. That was the last time anyone saw her. At first, no one panicked. Friends assumed she'd crashed at someone's place. But hours passed. Her boyfriend hadn't heard from her. Calls went unanswered. Messages read, but not replied to. By noon, her mother was unraveling. By evening, she was a storm. They called everyone. No one had seen her. No one had answers. The police took the case. The community flooded social media with her photos. Descriptions. What she wore. Where she was last seen. Strangers shared it again and again, praying someone might recognize the girl with white sneakers who had disappeared like smoke in the wind. Her father drove the streets, headlights scanning curbs and alleyways like searchlights. Her mother wept in live interviews. Mia always comes home, she whispered. She always calls me. Surveillance footage poured in from stores, clubs, street corners. Thousands of clips. Hundreds of hours. Every second scanned. At first, nothing. Then, a sliver of footage, Mia stepping out into the cold, speaking briefly to a man, then walking off into shadow. The man was questioned. He had an alibi. He left in a taxi. Still no trace. Police dissected every piece of footage. They traced a possible route to the bus stop. Her last known steps. But no cameras caught her boarding. No witnesses saw her after that brief exchange. It was as if the city swallowed her whole. Days turned to weeks. Whispers of trafficking, of underground networks, of serial predators began to spread. No one knew where Mia had gone. But in the cold stillness of that February morning, something terrible had happened. Something that left no screams. No blood. Just absence. Mia's mother stopped sleeping. She refused to take down her daughter's pictures. On the third week, police found something. A sneaker. White. Half buried in the mud near a construction site, miles away from where she'd vanished. The pattern matched. It was hers. They never found the rest. To this day, no one knows what really happened to Mia. Just as no one truly understood the full darkness inside Edwin Lara. Some monsters hide behind badges. Others wait in the cold, blending in with the night. And sometimes, their paths cross. Quietly. Tragically. And all that's left behind is silence. It had been over a day since Mia vanished, and each tick of the clock gnawed at the nerves of her family. Behind the closed doors of a modest home, her mother sat in the living room, gripping a photograph that still held the warmth of a smile that now haunted every waking moment. Her father paced quietly in the hallway, too angry to cry, too afraid to hope. Investigators, scattered across the district like chess pieces, had begun combing through Mia's background. They hoped her past might whisper some secret, some misstep or danger she hadn't seen coming. But Mia wasn't the type to stumble. She was 22, sharp as a blade, and gentle as spring. The kind of girl who'd remember your birthday even if she barely knew you. She had spent her days buried in medical textbooks at Aalborg University, just months away from graduating with honors. Nights, however, held a different hue. In the twilight, Mia was light-footed and radiant, walking into rooms as though she belonged to every one of them. Modeling had started as a hobby, but with each photo shoot, she was becoming more than just another face in a frame. There were no records, no red flags, no signs that the world had teeth waiting to sink into her. Yet there were whispers. Subtle, hushed whispers from her closest friends. They said Mia had changed. Not drastically, but enough for those who truly knew her to feel the tremor beneath her smile. She drank more. She laughed harder. She danced longer, her eyes shimmering with a restless energy. She flirted openly, playfully, as though daring the night to catch her. Strangers orbited around her like moths to flame, and in a crowd of unknown faces, danger sometimes wears a grin. February 6th was cold, bitterly so. The night she disappeared, Mia had gone to a party, one of those half-forgotten, dimly lit gatherings where music drowns out consequence. Footage from the club trickled into police hands like fragments of a broken mirror. She was seen dancing, smiling, disappearing into corners, emerging again, always vibrant. But then, at 6:09 a.m., surveillance footage caught a glimpse that sent a chill through everyone watching, Mia, alone at a bus stop, just 300 meters from the club. She wasn't dressed for the cold. Her jacket was thin, her legs bare beneath a skirt that had made sense hours earlier, under flashing lights. Now, in the gray of dawn, she looked small. Vulnerable. A bus pulled up. She exchanged a few words with the driver, but then, inexplicably, she stepped back and let it go. Maybe it was the wrong one. Maybe she was waiting for someone else. Maybe something felt off. 7:35 a.m. came and went. She was still there. Still waiting. That's when the car arrived. It slowed down deliberately. They spoke, briefly, calmly, and she got in. She didn't flinch. Didn't hesitate. Which meant the driver either felt familiar, or skilled at pretending. Perhaps he was someone from the party. Or an unlicensed cab driver. Whoever he was the last person to see Mia alive. The footage was grainy, indecipherable. Faces blurred. The license plate unreadable. It was like the night had swallowed its secrets and refused to spit them back out. 2 days later, the police widened their net. They returned to her friends, pulling the night apart detail by detail. One girl, pale, trembling, said she walked with Mia to the bus stop. She left only when Mia insisted she'd be fine. She remembered Mia's path clearly, and that helped investigators locate nearby cameras they'd missed before. Then came a break. One clip, clearer than the rest, caught the license plate as the car passed under a street lamp. It was unusual, not a normal Danish plate. Something custom, something odd. Enough for a lead. February 9th. Officers tracked the vehicle to a 2015 Volkswagen Golf parked just 5 streets from the club. It belonged to a man whose record was short, but curious, Thomas Thompson. A 30-year-old electrician. Polite. Disciplined. Former military. Nothing too loud, but when they knocked on his door, something felt still. The house was too quiet. The air too thick. He lived with an old friend, another man with a forgettable face and forgettable name. They both claimed ignorance. But under Danish law, when investigators asked for access to the car, they got it. 24 hours of crawling through fibers and seats and silence. Thomas was arrested quietly. The friend was released. It didn't mean he was innocent. It meant that, for now, the focus had shifted. The hearing was closed. No journalists. No onlookers. Inside the courthouse, it was just the prosecutors, the judge, and Thomas, calm, collected, his military training showing even in restraint. He didn't deny knowing Mia. He didn't confirm it either. He just listened. His story unraveled piece by piece under the scrutiny of investigators. Thomas had grown up in southeastern Denmark, in a tiny, cold town where everyone knew everyone's dog by name. He served in the military, earned his stripes. When he left, he didn't spiral, he built something. Became an electrician. Moved to his grandparents' farm. He was quiet, reliable. That's what made this so hard to believe. But no one wakes up a monster. Not all at once. Back at the bus stop, the ghost of Mia lingered. People laid flowers. Strangers wept. It had been 4 days. No demands. No messages. Just silence stretching across every inch of hope her family had left. Thomas was held for 4 weeks. As the days bled into each other, investigators dug deeper. Into his past. Into his associates. Into the car, into the crevices where fibers catch and DNA clings. They searched for signs that Mia had ever been there. And somewhere, beneath the layers of normalcy he had so carefully built, there was something. A hair. A thread. A scent. Something. Something that made the hairs on the back of the lead investigator's neck stand on end as he leaned over the evidence table one night, alone, under flickering fluorescent lights. Because this wasn't just a disappearance. It was a vanishing act soaked in shadows, one that started with a girl too trusting, a man too careful, and a cold Danish morning that never truly ended. And somewhere, out there, the silence still held her name. Thomas was always the quiet one in the neighborhood, the man who kept his windows closed and curtains drawn no matter the season. People said he worked from home, some thought he didn't work at all. He drove a black Volkswagen, always clean, always parked in the same corner of the lot, never out of place. But it wasn't the car that drew attention, it was what was found because of it. When Mia disappeared, her last known location was a bus stop on a cold, drizzling night. She never made it home. That stop had no cameras, just a flickering streetlight and a crooked bench under a dying oak tree. A passerby remembered seeing a dark car idle nearby. That was all the police needed to start digging. Thomas was brought in quietly. No cuffs, no shouting. Just questions, calm, methodical ones. The officers told him they needed to inspect his vehicle. He shrugged, gave them the keys, said something vague about not being surprised because someone's always watching. He didn't know the storm he had just invited into his life. The black Volkswagen had a GPS system installed. Nothing fancy, just enough to track basic routes. Thomas had tried to disable it, for hours before the time Mia vanished. 4 hours, just enough time to wander, to search, to wait. What he didn't know was that a technical fault in the GPS had kept it recording silently, every 15 seconds, logging his location like a heartbeat too stubborn to stop. They traced his journey. From his home to the edge of the city, then to a string of small towns. He had driven without purpose, or so it seemed. Then something changed. He stopped circling. He picked someone up. They couldn't see who, not from the GPS alone. But nearby cameras caught glimpses. One at a gas station showed a girl getting into his car. Her coat matched the one Mia wore that night. The timestamp fit perfectly. Thomas didn't go home after that. Instead, he drove through rural backroads, places with no houses, no lights, just endless trees. He stopped briefly in Lisrata, a remote town no one visits unless they have a reason. He stayed there for hours. Then he vanished. No activity for 2 days. When the signal reappeared, he was heading back into the city like nothing happened. The police brought in forensics teams and dogs. At first, there was nothing. Just mud, pine needles, the smell of decay that could have been from animals. But deeper in the woods, the dogs began to bark, to claw, to pull their handlers towards something buried beneath moss and soil. A hair tie. Then a pair of underwear, a torn shirt, socks. All laid out as if dropped one by one. Like someone had been running. Or dragged. Or both. The line they formed wasn't random. It curved and twisted, like it had followed a frantic, spiraling path through the forest. Farther in, under a tangle of roots and disturbed ground, they found flesh. Cut, scattered, dismembered. Not buried carefully. No reverence. Just hidden, like shameful evidence thrown away. There were 231 separate pieces. Some were buried. Some weren't. Some were partially melted, soaked in a chemical mixture that left the skin ghostly pale, rubbery. Others had been gnawed at, wild animals, maybe. Or time, taking its toll. The autopsy would later confirm what many already feared. The remains belonged to Mia. Her cause of death was strangulation, strong, deliberate pressure, not accidental. An electric saw had been used afterward. The kind sold at hardware stores for cutting wood. Not flesh. When confronted, Thomas didn't panic. He didn't deny it either, not at first. He leaned back in the interrogation chair and said he saw her at the bus stop. She looked cold. Vulnerable. He said he felt sorry for her. Offered her a ride. He told the officers she had smiled at him, talked to him sweetly. That she was comfortable in his car. Too comfortable. He said she agreed to go for a drive. Just a drive. His story changed every time he opened his mouth. First, he claimed they pulled into the woods to talk. Then he said they had sex, consensual. Then he said she had a seizure. Fell. Broke her neck. Another version said she ran from the car, tripped on a rock, hit her head. He even wept once, saying he panicked, afraid no one would believe him because of his past. That he had messed up before. That this was just another mistake that got out of control. But the evidence said otherwise. He didn't call for help. He didn't run to a neighbor or the police. He took her body home. He laid her on a plastic sheet in the basement. He tried chemicals first, strong alkalis. The kind used to clean drains. Left her there, submerged. When that didn't work, he brought out the saw. Dismembered her with cold, mechanical precision. Stored pieces in garbage bags. Buried some in the woods. Burned others with his own clothes. The ashes still held traces of blood, bone fragments, scraps of fabric. He said it was fear. The police called it cruelty. They believed Thomas had waited for Mia. That he had seen her before. That this wasn't random. He knew where she waited for the bus, knew what time she usually appeared. The disabled GPS, the carefully timed stops, the isolated forest, all of it spoke of planning. They say he watched her that night, waited for the moment when the cold got to her, when she couldn't take it anymore and accepted the offer she should have refused. Inside the car, they found Mia's DNA, on the seat, the door, the dashboard. In his home, there were blood stains in the drains, on the saw, in the grout between the basement tiles. There was no doubt. She had been there. She had died there. The worst part? There were signs she had fought. Bruises. scratches, skin under her fingernails. There may have been more, evidence of deeper violations, but the condition of the body made it impossible to say for sure. The horror of it was in the silence. In what couldn't be proven, but was felt in every scarred fragment of her. Thomas stopped talking eventually. He offered nothing more. Just silence. Cold. Unshaken. The prosecutor's final report painted the picture that no one wanted to believe. Thomas hunted that night. Not like a man. Like a predator. 3 separate stops in the forest before he found the right place. Signs that Mia tried to run, maybe more than once. That he chased her down. That he didn't just kill, he broke her, destroyed her, tried to erase her. But she fought. Every bruise told that story. Every torn shred of fabric. She fought until she couldn't anymore. And Thomas, for all his silence, for all his efforts to hide it, left behind the one thing he couldn't erase, the truth. Thomas Thompson didn't look like the kind of man who could hold something so dark behind his eyes. To most, he was just another face in the crowd, blending in, polite when spoken to, quiet at gatherings. But what no one could see, what no one even imagined, was the twisted rot quietly blooming inside him. That day, the one where everything began to unravel, he took off work. Just one day. A small ripple in his otherwise clockwork life. To his colleagues, it didn't mean much. Maybe he had a cold. Maybe he needed a break. But behind closed doors, something far more sinister was happening. Mia Skadhosh-Stevens' life ended that day, in silence and terror, inside a room where the curtains were drawn tight and the music was loud enough to drown out her screams. And as the hours passed, as her body went cold, Thomas didn't flee. He didn't weep. He didn't even sit with the weight of what he had done. He went out and ordered pizza. He laughed with friends. He binged on cakes and sugar-drenched desserts, like a man celebrating instead of mourning. There was no grief. No horror in his eyes. Just appetite. Her family, devastated and raw, watched the courtroom later as Thomas tried to twist the story. He said she consented. Said it was all a misunderstanding. Said she had willingly taken part in something dark, something violent. But her loved ones knew better. They knew Mia. And they called his words what they were, lies, callous, cruel lies that smeared her memory with filth. Lies that danced on her grave. The investigators dug deep, peeling back layers of Thomas's life. What they uncovered felt like the edge of something far more massive than one murder. In 2019, he was caught lurking near a university dorm, tailing a student back to her apartment. She wasn't his first. Far from it. In 2015 and 2017, 2 other women had reported something chilling, a man watching them through their windows at night. One of them remembered it all too clearly. She was brushing her teeth when she heard the soft, deliberate tap on her window. It was storming that night, the rain hammering against the glass. When she looked up, she saw him, his pants around his ankles, staring at her through the glass, unmoving, like a predator studying prey. Even after she screamed, after she turned on every light and called her parents, he didn't run immediately. He stood there for just a moment longer, eyes blank, mouth slightly open. The rain washing over his body. And then, he vanished. They'd made a sketch back then. It never led to an arrest. And Thomas? He kept moving forward like nothing had ever happened. Back in 2010, there was something worse. 3 women sharing an apartment had been woken in the middle of the night by a creaking sound. One of them thought maybe it was just the wind. The second thought it might be the cat. But the third, she stepped into the hallway and froze. There was someone in their apartment. The man didn't say a word. He lunged at her, forced her to the floor. She fought, screamed, but it didn't matter. He assaulted her, then disappeared into the shadows, leaving behind a room full of blood and nightmares. Police came, but with no evidence, No fingerprints, no DNA, they couldn't catch him. The victims, shattered and sleepless, waited years for justice that never came. But they remembered. And years later, when they saw Thomas's face, they recognized something familiar. Then came the ex-girlfriend. She had known Thomas longer than most. She described him not as violent, but worse, controlled. Cold. The kind of man who measured every word, every smile, but erupted in fury over the tiniest disobedience. She recounted an evening where she simply arrived late for dinner. He didn't speak. Just stared at her the entire meal, knuckles white against the table. After they broke up, she tried to move on. But one morning, she got in her car and pressed the brake. Nothing. The pedals sank to the floor. No resistance. Mechanics later told her someone had tampered with the brake hose. Deliberately. She couldn't prove it was Thomas. But in her bones, she knew. Another witness, someone who once repaired Thomas's laptop, found a folder. Hidden, encrypted. Inside it, a list of names, wives, he called them. And along with it, videos and images too disturbing to describe. Violent fantasies acted out on digital victims. Murders. Assaults. Screams. Psychiatrists examined him. They said he was narcissistic. Empty. He saw people as things. Toys. Bodies. Even with all of this, the stalking, the sexual violence, the manipulation, Thomas stood in court and denied it all. He swore he hadn't killed Mia. He said she slipped. That she'd been injured. That he panicked. But the truth was plain. If she had been hurt, he could have called for help. He didn't. Instead, he cut her into pieces. Stuffed her body in trash bags. Dumped what remained of her in places no one should be buried. And still, he slept. Ate. Laughed. He admitted only to dismembering her. As if that made him less of a monster. In June 2023, the gavel came down. Thomas Thompson, 38, was convicted, not just of murder, but of aggravated indecency with a body. He would spend the rest of his life behind bars. A life sentence, though parole was technically possible in 10 years. But the prosecutor was clear, Thomas wasn't just dangerous. He was a predator. A sociopath. A threat that had finally been caged after years of hunting in the dark. And while Thomas rots in a cell, the memory of Mia lives in photographs, in family albums, in the cries of those who loved her. And in the silence of that one day he took off work, the day her light went out. Jordan didn't plan to mention the surprise. Not just yet. The timing wasn't right, and besides, Cody had been quiet all morning. There was a look in his eyes, restless, somewhere between distracted and deeply troubled. They sat together at an afternoon church service, shoulder to shoulder but miles apart in thought. After the service, instead of heading straight home, they wandered down by the lake. The breeze carried the smell of pine and something faintly metallic from the water. They barely spoke during the walk. Cody never returned to work after that. And for anyone who knew him, that was strange, unnerving, even. He was dependable, almost boringly so. When he didn't show up, his boss, Cameron, grew anxious. At first, it was just concern. Then it became dread. Cameron drove to Cody's home after hours. The front door was locked, no windows broken, no signs of a struggle. But when he went around to the garage, something gnawed at him deeper than worry. Cody's car was gone, but his phone was there. Cody never left without his phone. The screen was dead. Cold. Lifeless. It had been left on the floor of the garage as if dropped, or abandoned. Cameron stood there, silent, the kind of silence that screams. He didn't waste another minute. He called the police. The detectives came with their clipboards and standard questions, beginning with Jordan. She seemed composed, but her eyes twitched with each question. Her story unfolded hesitantly, like peeling off layers of something rotten. She told them that Cody had received a phone call while they were coming back from Dairy Queen. He talked for 30 minutes, too long for an ordinary chat. She didn't know who he was speaking to, but by the end of the call, he looked shaken. His hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel. When they pulled up to Jordan's place, she realized her phone was dying and her charger was still at work. She drove back to pick it up, leaving Cody in the garage. She claimed he seemed calm again, like the moment had passed. Later, she got a text from him. Just a few words. Going for a ride with someone. Be back soon. That was the last time she heard from him. She didn't panic right away. Cody had a soft spot for cars and strange, late-night joyrides with friends he barely knew. It wasn't unusual for him to meet up with someone to talk about engines or racing under the stars. But when he didn't return home by morning, a shadow crept over her thoughts. Still, she waited. Hours turned into days. She didn't call the police. I didn't want to overreact, she said. The community rallied quickly. Friends and family dove into Cody's social media, scanning for messages, status updates, anything. A friend dug up his call history. One number stood out, a Washington area code. Jordan had mentioned seeing a dark-colored car with Washington plates pull away the night Cody vanished. The lead felt promising. Detectives traced the plates to a man named Jose. Jose seemed caught off guard when questioned. He admitted calling Cody about some borrowed tools. The conversation was casual, forgettable. He had an alibi. The police ruled him out, though the coincidence with the Washington plates left a bad taste. 3 days passed. Still no Cody. No clues. Just silence. The police returned to Jordan. Her timeline didn't quite match up. Her words were careful, but they felt rehearsed. She said Cody left without saying who he was meeting. Then she suddenly recalled the message, he was going for a ride. Then there was something about Glacier Park. Cody always took his friends there. But Cody hated heights. He hated cliffs, ledges, and mountain roads with no guardrails. He used to laugh about it, but not really. His friends remembered how he once refused to climb a ladder to change a bulb in his mother's kitchen. His fear of falling was almost childlike. So why would he go to Glacier Park at night? Jordan came to the station days later with her mother, holding a phone with trembling fingers. An email had arrived that morning from a man named Tony. It was short, clinical. Stop looking for Cody. He's gone. He fell. It was an accident. Tony. Cody's coworker. The police found him quickly. He denied everything. He hadn't emailed anyone. In fact, he hadn't seen Cody in weeks. He was getting married, planning a future. Cody had dropped off the radar weeks before. Tony handed over his phone, his laptop. His hands didn't shake. He was telling the truth. So, who sent the email? Jordan didn't wait for answers. She gathered a group of friends and volunteers and led them deep into the park. She seemed to know where she was going. Not like someone hoping to stumble across a clue, but like someone retracing steps. The terrain was brutal, twisted, rocks and shadows tangled together like a nightmare. And yet she moved with purpose. They reached the edge of a steep ravine near a looping trail. It was the kind of place where echoes sound like whispers and the wind tastes like dread. She stopped suddenly. There, she said, pointing down into the gorge. I see him. The group froze. No one could see anything from above. But Jordan insisted, she saw someone down there. She shouted Cody's name, called the rangers, begged them to come. It was already too dark. Too dangerous. They waited until morning. At 8 a.m., July 12th, the sun rose over Glacier Park, cold and golden. Rangers descended the ravine with ropes tied to trees. The air grew heavier with every foot they dropped. Then someone found it, a single blue sneaker, soaked and stained, buried near the water's edge. It matched the ones Cody wore. And then, they found him. Face down. Still. His body nestled in shallow water near a jagged outcrop of rock. Beside him was a small, torn piece of black cloth. His wedding ring was gone. His face was pale, peaceful. Too peaceful. People whispered. Why would Cody be here? Why would a man terrified of heights climb down a trail that even seasoned hikers avoided at night? Why no wedding ring? Why was Jordan the one who led them straight to his body? Eddie, Cody's oldest friend, stared at the spot for a long time. He never would have come here, he said under his breath. Not willingly. Jordan didn't speak at the recovery site. She just watched, unmoving. Later that evening, she posted a wedding photo on Instagram. The caption read, "I miss you. Every day. You were everything." Some commented with hearts and broken emojis. Others said nothing. But in small corners of town, in hushed rooms, people began to ask the questions the police hadn't answered. And one night, long after the search ended, Cameron, the boss who had found the phone, received a call from a blocked number. All he heard was breathing. Then a whisper. He didn't fall. Click. The line went dead. And the silence returned. But not everyone was convinced Cody had found his end at the bottom of that cliff. Not by accident. Not alone. Jordan sat at the edge of her bed, motionless. Her fingers curled tightly around a silver locket that still smelled faintly of Cody's cologne, warm, woodsy, familiar. Her eyes were dry, too dry for someone who had just buried the love of her life. Or at least, that's what everyone thought. She whispered to herself, just barely audible in the dim silence of her room, "I love you with all my heart and soul. I'll see you again one day." The words hung in the air like stale perfume, lifeless and deliberate. 2 weeks had passed. The investigation hadn't moved an inch. The police were baffled. Cody's mysterious disappearance had left too many questions. Then came that email, supposedly from Cody, claiming he needed space, that he had left voluntarily. But something didn't sit right. Cody would never just disappear, not without a word to his best friend. Not without telling his mother. Not the man who cried at his wedding. At his funeral, the church was heavy with grief. Everyone wore black except Jordan. She wore a soft, pale gray. Her face remained still, her eyes locked on the glow of her phone screen. No tears. No trembling hands. Just endless scrolling, as if the rest of the world didn't matter. Maybe that was her way of coping, some whispered. But not Kimberly. Not the girl who had known Jordan since childhood. She sat a few pews behind and watched, disturbed. Her gut churned. Something was wrong. Kimberly waited a few days before walking into the local precinct. She didn't want to believe what her instincts were screaming. But silence had become too heavy. She told the officer on duty everything, every message, every call, every red flag that had flickered and been ignored. It all started before the wedding. Jordan had been texting her non-stop, more obsessed with floral arrangements, the dress, the hashtag for Instagram, more than Cody himself. The wedding felt more like a photo shoot than a celebration of love. And Jordan, she seemed enthralled with being a bride, not a wife. Cody, meanwhile, was radiant, nervous, giddy, hopelessly in love. Kimberly remembered how he looked at Jordan, as if she was the only light left in the world. Jordan didn't return the same gaze. She smiled, but her eyes told a different story. Detached. Hesitant. And then there were the confessions. A week before the wedding, Jordan asked Kimberly, "What if I'm making a huge mistake?" Her voice was fragile. Her hands trembled. She spoke of dread, not excitement. Of fear, not passion. The wedding came and went. But something shifted on the wedding night. Jordan messaged Kimberly late, too late for a bride to be texting. She said she told Cody she was on her period to avoid intimacy. "There's too much I haven't figured out yet," she wrote. She didn't go into detail, not over text. "We'll talk in person," she said. And so Kimberly waited. Then came July 7th. That night, after dinner with friends, Kimberly's phone lit up with a message from Jordan again. This one was different. Short. Cold. "We talked. It didn't go well." At 9 p.m., Jordan was at Kimberly's door. Her face was pale, almost ghostly. She said she had left after an argument with Cody and was going to see her brother. But the way her hands shook, like she had been underwater and had just come up for air, gave Kimberly chills. What Jordan didn't know was that Kimberly kept every message. Every screenshot. Every timestamp. And when she handed them over to the detectives, things started to unravel. The email that claimed Cody had left town. It was traced back to an IP address, Jordan's father's house. The time it was sent. After Cody had supposedly vanished. And that wasn't all. CCTV footage from the park entrance at Glacier revealed more. Cody's car pulled in at 9:15 p.m. Two figures inside. Cody and Jordan. Both present. Both alive. Both heading into the night. When confronted, Jordan's story began to crumble. She was asked to come in. No lawyers yet. Just questions. Just truth, if she still had it left in her. She hesitated at first, but the silence in that small room clawed at her. Eventually, she spoke. Quietly. Slowly. "They had argued," she said. "Cody wanted to annul the marriage. If you're having doubts, let's end it now," he had told her. But Jordan didn't want the shame. 8 days. A divorce in 8 days. The whispers would never stop. She had always feared public shame more than private regret. They drove to the park. It was quiet. Too quiet. They walked across a narrow bridge, she claimed. The kind that creaks beneath each step. At one point, Cody suggested they climb over a fence, to talk, she said. But Cody had a known fear of heights. Why would he agree? Why blindfold himself? She didn't explain that part clearly. All she said next was that they argued again. Her voice shook as she said it. "He tried to grab me. I don't know what happened. It was all so fast." Then, silence. The fall was 300 feet. No scream. No attempt to run for help. Instead, Jordan returned home, logged onto her father's computer, and began composing a lie. Detectives weren't buying the accident story. Cody didn't fall. He didn't slip. He didn't jump. He was pushed. Jordan was arrested. First, second-degree murder. Then, as more evidence came to light, it escalated, first degree. The intent. The planning. The cover-up. The silence. Old friends of Jordan came forward, recalling things they had long dismissed: her emotional volatility, her unpredictable behavior, her inability to handle confrontation. One friend said she cried uncontrollably just before walking down the aisle, not from joy, but fear. The trial loomed like a storm cloud. As prosecutors laid out the timeline, the messages, the surveillance footage, a picture emerged, not of a grieving widow, but of a woman who had made a choice, and tried to bury it beneath lies and silence. Cody's family sat in the courtroom, broken but unwavering. Jordan showed little emotion. No tears. No apologies. Just the same vacant expression she wore at the funeral. People say the dead can't speak. But Cody? Cody spoke through every text he never got to send. Through every friend who saw the truth in Jordan's eyes long before that night. Through the silence of Glacier Park, where the wind now carries whispers, where darkness falls a little heavier, and where love, once so bright, was thrown into the void. And when night falls on that quiet Montana cliff, some say you can hear footsteps. Not going up, but going over. The sky above Glacier National Park stretched gray and indifferent the day Cody vanished. It was supposed to be a moment to remember, newlyweds, just days into marriage, taking in the serene vastness of nature, bound together by vows still fresh on their tongues. But something far colder than the wind that whipped across the cliffs lingered that morning. They say Jordan had told him she had a surprise, something special waiting. And he followed her. Of course he did. He always did. Later, they would find a torn piece of fabric, a strange bandage-like item, fluttering near the edge. It seemed out of place there among the rocks and snow, but it told a story, a silent, bloodless scream frozen in cotton. Jordan didn't call anyone. Not her parents. Not his friends. Not even 911. Days passed, and no alarm was raised. It was as if she wanted to scrub him out of the world quietly, as if Cody were just a brief character in a story she was writing, and now, revising. The prosecution painted a damning picture. Phone records told their own tale, calls that were never made, messages that seemed too calculated, too sterile. A fake email crafted to deflect suspicion. Her face, emotionless, vacant even in front of the people who once called her daughter, sister, wife. That emptiness, the hollow cavity where grief should have lived, haunted everyone in that courtroom. On the second day of the hearing, they turned the lights down low and played the police interrogation tapes. In the flicker of the screen, she seemed calm. Too calm. The jury leaned forward as she lied to the sergeant, the lies effortless, slippery. Her own brother, sixth in the line of siblings, stood tall, his voice shaking. He recalled how he had searched for Cody. How he'd fallen to his knees, sobbing, pleading with his sister to tell the truth. But she didn't. Not even to him. It unraveled quickly after that. For days into the trial, December 13, 2013, Jordan Graham walked into the courthouse as a free woman and left shackled at the wrists. Her voice, quiet and flat, echoed in the courtroom as she changed her plea, guilty, second-degree murder. She said she wasn't thinking. She said it wasn't planned. She said she just pushed him. But in the silence that followed, everyone knew something deeper, darker pulsed beneath the surface of that explanation. Cody's mother wept openly. Her sobs filled the room like wind through bare branches. But Jordan's parents? They said nothing. Just watched the floor. Then left. 30 years. That's what the judge gave her, no parole, no second chance. The first-degree charge and perjury dropped in exchange for the plea, but the sentence sealed her fate. She appealed, of course. They always do. March 26, 2014. Denied. And yet, the question that clawed at everyone's minds never got answered, why? Cody's friends tried to reason it out. He loved her, they said. No matter the frustration. No matter the distance that had crept between them. He would have let her go if she had asked. He would have walked away just to see her happy. So why didn't she just walk away too? Maybe she couldn't. Maybe there was something in her past, something about the way she was raised, the rigid fear of failure drilled into her by a family obsessed with perfection. Maybe she'd never learned how to speak when it mattered. Maybe shame turned her into a storm, quiet and deadly. But that storm didn't die in Glacier National Park. It whispered again in Alabama. November 27, 2017. A call came into the Sherry County Sheriff's Department around 9 a.m. A woman reported that her friend, Sarah Starr, may have taken her own life. The address led officers to a modest home nestled near a quiet churchyard. A house once lived in by the town's pastor, now leased only to trusted members of the church. Sarah Starr, 38 years old, divorced, mother of 4. Her life had been chipped away slowly, not by horror, not by violence, but by time and quiet disappointments. Her ex-husband Jason had once been her safe place. But that safety soured quickly. He had returned from military duty with eyes that saw too much and a heart hardened by unseen wounds. People had once described Sarah as radiant, grounded, kind. The kind of woman who could explain Shakespeare to children while tying a shoelace and packing a lunch with a laugh. But after their move to Alabama and the birth of 2 sets of twins, for young children under one roof, she wasn't laughing anymore. Jason grew darker. Restless. Rage hung in the air like mildew. The man who once held her hand now barked orders and slammed doors. At first, Sarah hid it behind warm smiles in the school hallway. She volunteered at the church. She brought casseroles to sick neighbors. But behind her front door, she was unraveling. The kids cried too much. Jason drank too much. Sleep never lasted long, and dreams turned into whispers in the dark that something wasn't right. Still, Sarah endured. Until one day, she didn't. The morning she was found, her body lay still in a house with too many memories and not enough warmth. The woman who called it and claimed it looked like a suicide. But the officers noticed things. A broken coffee cup. A bruised wrist. A drawer slightly ajar, papers scattered like a struggle had taken place. They interviewed the neighbors. Some said they'd heard shouting the night before. Others saw a car speed off in the early hours. Jason, of course, was missing. When they found him 3 days later, camped out in a cousin's trailer 2 counties away, his hands were shaking. But not from grief. Jason's version of the story didn't hold. He said he hadn't seen her in days. But her phone showed a string of messages from him the night before, the kind of messages a man sends when his control is slipping. No charges were filed right away. Sarah's death wasn't immediately ruled a homicide. But something about the house felt wrong. Like the walls were keeping secrets. Like Sarah had tried to scream, but no one heard her. In the days that followed, her children went to stay with relatives. The church held a quiet memorial. Her classroom sat empty, her lesson plan still pinned to the board. Some say Sarah never left the house entirely. That lights flicker now in the hallway where her children used to chase one another. That sometimes, if you're quiet, you can hear the faint scratching of a pencil against paper in the middle of the night, her spirit still trying to make sense of her final lesson. 2 women. 2 broken homes. 2 tragedies bound by silence and suffocation. And somewhere beneath the grief, beneath the courtroom floors and church pews, something colder lurks, a whisper that love, once twisted, doesn't just fade. It kills.